Today we celebrate the Epiphany of the Lord. That's what the feast is called. If I say the Nativity of the Lord, well, obviously everyone recalls that it's Christmas Day, the birth of Christ. The Epiphany, 12th night, 12 days after Christmas, take the decorations down, or it completes Christmas. But the meaning of it is important. In some ways a contrast, but mainly it's a fulfillment of what happened at Christmas. The Nativity, the birth of Christ. Epiphany is our realization what it really means. Now, the human story of what happened to Mary we can sympathize with and take into account. You could rather feel what she would have felt, and Joseph and so on. It's a very human story. And being human, perhaps it helps us to understand the divine, the coming of God, but also it could sort of mask it. You can sympathize with Mary had gone down to Judea to see her cousin who was pregnant, stayed there. And then when she came back, she's about 4 months pregnant herself, and soon after that she's told they have to go all the way down to Bethlehem again to register because the Romans ordered it. I'm pregnant, I can't, she says. Well, you get fined or imprisoned if you have to go. And so then the worry and perhaps anxiety, would she bond with the child? Where would the child be born? And then the joy of the birth. That sort of thing we can enter into and sympathize, not realizing the full significance of it. Now, it's Luke's gospel, Luke, who would have known Mary and probably got the story from her. He describes the going to Bethlehem and so on, and the birth of the child. St. Matthew, in his gospel, has a very different way of writing. And on the Feast of the Epiphany, we home in most of all on the story of the Magi coming to worship Jesus. And that is really more symbolic than telling of history. The description Luke gives of Mary having the child, that's what happened. I just remind you of the story, I read it to you. After Jesus had been born at Bethlehem in Judea, during the reign of King Herod, some wise men came to Jerusalem from the east. "Where is the infant King of the Jews?" they asked. "We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to do him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was perturbed, and so was the whole of Jerusalem with him. So he called together all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, and inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. "At Bethlehem in Judea," they told him, "for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, you are by no means least among the leaders of Judah, for out of you will come a leader who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod summoned the wise men to see him privately. He asked them the exact date on which the star had appeared and sent them on to Bethlehem. "Go and find out all about the child," he said, "and when you found him, let me know, so that I may go and do him homage." Having listened to what the king had to say, they set out, and there in front of them was the star they had seen rising. It went forward and stopped over the place where the child was. The sight of the star filled them with great joy, and going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and falling down on their knees, they did him homage. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. but they were warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, and they returned to their own country by a different way. That is really a symbolic story in this sense. If a star stopped over the house where I am, I say it's exactly above us, then people from about 30 or 40 miles around would say the star is immediately above us. That's what a star is like. That they should follow all that astrology, or the gifts they brought for a baby. Gold, frankincense, myrrh. Instead of a jumpsuit or something to wrap the baby in. No, obviously, this is a symbolism. Is it true? Well, you might say, was the story of the Good Samaritan true? What it teaches is true. And what this is teaching us is true. And the meaning clearly is that people were coming from a far off country. They were coming to find Christ. And a star or something in their lives were guiding them. I am looking for Christ. I want to come to a deeper realization of understanding who Christ is in my life. And I look to see what star there is. And another element which is important in the story is that straight away there are people opposed to Christ. It says Herod was perturbed and the whole of Jerusalem. If Herod's perturbed, Jerusalem had reason to be. The two things, seeking Christ and accepting that there will be a rejection of him. And when he was presented in the temple as a small baby, the priest Simeon said, "This charge is for the rise and fall of many, a sign to be rejected." So we look for the stars in our lives. There may be quite small things which lead you towards Christ, as opposed to things which lead you in the other direction. Or there may be sometimes quite fundamental things you can look back and say, that was a turning point in my life. Quite a simple thing happened, some years ago now. I was visiting my family. I hadn't been there for some time, and as I was walking down Elgin Road where we lived, I met a couple I'd known when I was a child, Mr. and Mrs. Darby, and we chatted as we went along. And then when they went to their house, I said goodbye and God bless you. And Mrs. Darby turned and said, "Oh, thank you." Well, the word God bless you does mean a lot to me, but I realised it more because of her reaction like that. Now, last week I was on the telephone to someone and he'd done me a good favour, and as he went off I said goodbye, "God bless you," and he said, "Don't mention it." Don't mention it. What did it mean? You can use a phrase like that and lose the meaning. Or it can be a star, something somebody says. Recently somebody came to me, tried to get over the death of her mother, who died about 6 months ago. And she's coming to terms with it. And I could see that as she realized that her mother now was with God, part of her life, part of her whole being was face to face with God. When she realized that, it's a star. That is something which leads her in the direction, brings her closer to Christ, or if you like, a deeper realization of what it means when Christ came. So we find our Lord Jesus at different levels. Some is like the story of Bethlehem, the human story, and other times a realization what that means, that God has become human. You know that hymn, O Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hand has made. I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder. Yes, sometimes nature or things happening reveal the power of God to us. But the next verse, and when I think that God his Son not sparing sent him to die, I scarce can take it in. I say, when I think that God sent his Son to be a human being, a baby, I scarce can take it in. But when I think on that, yeah, there's a star that leads me to Christ. And there's also this other element which I need to accept, that if I follow Christ, there will often be a sense of rejection, of things going wrong, or I think they've gone wrong. And the Lord saying, no, I'm still there. And realizing how much this happened to Jesus himself, just the fact that they were in such difficulty at the time of the birth, away from home, nowhere to stay, but also right through his life, people rejecting him and opposing him. When things go wrong, it's not really that God hasn't lost the plot. God is still leading me. And sometimes it seems wrong because I haven't really appreciated the significance of God becoming human. The angel said, peace on earth. He came to bring peace. And then you look around and see the world and say, where is peace? More significant is this. When God became a human being, when Christ was born, we were then at peace with God. Somehow the human race had become cut off from God. When Christ was born, we made peace with God. We were brought into the family of God. Jesus is God and Jesus is my brother. And the significance of his birth and becoming human is that it has changed the whole world. And sometimes when I don't see how it has worked out, it is partly because I haven't seen it deeply enough within myself. I pray for peace, but sometimes thinking that's just an absence of fighting, because there is so much fighting in the world at present. No, it is something deeper than that. And even where there is suffering, this deep relationship with God and with Christ, there is a peace. The Epiphany is a realization, when I come to realize and say, oh, now I see what it means. I continue to grow in that. So look for the stars that have come into your life. Sometimes you've been following them without realizing that they are stars and they brought you closer to Christ. But it's a good metaphor, a good image. People who have led you to Christ and you didn't realize it. I'll take the last verse of that hymn I was quoting. When Christ shall come with shouts of acclamation to take me home, what joy will fill my heart? Then I shall bow in humble adoration and there proclaim, my God, how great thou art, how great thou art.